This
Yeah, that's
in
it.
the ascension, this in the ascension takes place because there is here completed the transition to the absolute unity, of which the gnosis is the decisive step, but not the final resting place. In the gnosis, the soul is aware of its infinity and lives in it. Yet it lives also in a working center for the individual play of the infinite. It
Yeah.
realizes its identity. Shilpade, please mute yourself now. Sometimes it disturbs. It realizes its identity with all existences, but it keeps a distinction without difference by which it can have also the contact with them in a certain diversiveness. This is the distinction for the joy of contact, which in the mind becomes not only difference, but in its self experience, division from our other selves. In its spiritual being, a sense of loss of self, one with us and others, and a reaching after the felicity it has forfeited in life, a compromise between egoistic self absorption and a blind seeking out for the lost oneness. In its infinite consciousness, the Gnostic soul creates a sort of voluntary limitation for its own wisdom purposes. It has even its particular luminous aura of being in which it moves. Although beyond that, it enters into all things and identifies itself with all being and all existences. In the Ananda, all is reversed. The center disappears. In the bliss nature, there is no center, nor any voluntary or imposed circumference, but all is. All are one equal being, one identical spirit. The bliss soul finds and feels itself everywhere. It has no mansion, is aniket, or has the all for its mansion, or if it likes, it has all things for its many mansions, open to each other forever. All other selves are entirely its own selves, in action as well as in essence. The joy of contact in diverse oneness becomes altogether the joy of absolute identity in innumerable oneness. Existence is no longer formulated in the terms of the knowledge, because the known and knowledge and the knower are wholly one self here, and since all possesses all in an intimate identity beyond the closest closeness, there is no need of what we call knowledge. All the consciousness is of the bliss of the infinite. All power is power of the bliss of the infinite. All forms and activities are forms and activities of the bliss of the infinite. In this absolute truth of its being, the eternal soul of Ananda lives. Here deformed by contrary phenomena, there brought back and transfigured into their reality.
Very clear description of the what happens in the supramental consciousness. So he is saying something very interesting. Before we start reading, we will just say, at the highest level, absolutely the highest level, there is only one. That means to say, there is absolutely no question of the manifestation of the universe. The divine is looking only inwards into itself. Chid Ghana, okay, like a black hole. It is conscious only of, in fact, even there are two states. He has said earlier. He has said that there is a complete indrawing consciousness and it is not even aware of its own potentialities. The second one slightly lower, it is concentrated, but it also knows itself. In other words, when it says it knows itself, it knows what it is capable of, its characteristics. But the other one is absolute oneness. So as it keeps coming down, the one starts becoming the many. And the middle term is a supermind where you can have the one and the many at the same time. So this is what Srimji is describing. And when it starts coming down even below the supermind, the oneness starts disappearing and only the multiplicity becomes more and more obvious. In other words, you start believing that all the separate things in the physical world are real and really separate and not connected at all. Like you don't feel yourself connected to your neighbors, your even family members, nothing. You feel them as separate. You may have sympathy and you may have love, but they are separate. And in the physical world, this separation is absolutely the most prominent. We can't say that there is no unity in the, no oneness in the physical world. There is a oneness, but it's very much in the background. Like, as we usually give the example of the species. All the cats are different, but there is something called catness, the species. That's the oneness. But it becomes very abstract and very subtle. It's not a fact in the physical world. It's not a physical fact. So this is what he is describing. Right from the top, one comes down and becomes the many. But he is stopping here in this paragraph and describing the condition of the midway point in the supermind. The midway point, you have both. You have oneness as well as the many, and the relation between them. So this is what he is going to describe. Now I read each sentence. This in the ascension. Remember, he is talking about the ascension. He is going one by one, he has been going. Now he is talking about gnosis and ananda. Gnosis is supermind, and ananda is, there can be a condition where only ananda is experienced, not knowledge nor power. So that also will come later on in this paragraph. So this in the ascension takes place. Who is ascending? The consciousness of the yogi, who is making his going up. This in the ascension takes place because there is here completed the transition to the absolute unity, of which gnosis is a decisive step. So very clearly, absolute unity is even above the gnosis, above the supermind. Absolute unity. There can be unity also, but not absolute unity, of which the gnosis is a decisive step. So to get to the absolute unity, you have to go through the supermind, which is a gnosis. Gnosis is the supermind, okay? But not the final resting place. Okay, even the Gnostic consciousness, the supermind, evolution will continue even beyond that. So it's not the final resting place, but it's the next step in evolution in the physical world also. That's what it's saying, not the final resting place. Very clear. In the gnosis, the soul is now, his description of a soul which has experienced and is living in the gnosis, in the supermental consciousness. Like mother's experience of 1958, okay, the supermental board. She is very much there. Okay. I request all of you to read the supermental board. Mother's experience of the supermental board in 1958. Very, very fascinating description. This is the ascension day. Now, in the absolute unity, which is the gnosis, of which the gnosis is a decisive step, but not the final resting place. In the gnosis, the soul is aware of its infinity and lives in it. In other words, there is absolutely no limitations. You are not limited at all. Neither your body, nor your vital, nor your mind, nor your ego. You are outside. You are conscious of everything, but you are in the infinite. Yet it lives also in a working center for the individual play of the infinite. So in other words, part of you is also there in the body-mind life. That's what he's saying. It's a working center. It's not a permanent center. For us, we are permanently settled in the body-mind life. Permanently means relatively permanent, at least for this life. But for him, for the one who is there at that higher level, it is like your home and your office. The home is your permanent home, that's a supermind, and you go to the office to work from there. It's only a working place. So the supermental soul lives permanently in the supermind, and yet he sends some part of himself into his working center in the physical body. Okay? For the individual play of the infinite. But even the difference between them is when we are in our body-mind life, we are permanently, and we are not living, and the individual play is not of the infinite, but of the finite for us. But for the supramental soul, it is working in the body-mind life, but for the individual play of the infinite. It means that you feel yourself to be one with everybody else, like in the cosmic consciousness. Okay, that's what he said. It is a working center, but for the individual play of the infinite. It realizes its identity with all existences. There you are. That's a cosmic consciousness. I am one with everybody else. Okay. You feel yourself to be one with everybody else. You identify yourself with their being totally. Again, I repeat, to understand this, you can identify yourself with somebody else in the mind. You can identify yourself with somebody in the vital. In other words, you know what his feelings are, you know what his thoughts are. But there's even a possibility of an identification with the subtle body. The example of that yogi who experiences the whip marks, being an animal is being whipped, and he identifies himself with that, and the whip marks appear on his own back. So much the identification will take place. Realizes his identity with all existences. Okay? But it keeps a distinction without difference. Now note that, very interesting observation. It keeps a distinction without difference. In other words, although I am everybody, yet I am aware of myself as someone who is in a way separate from the others. Okay? That's an individual play of the infinite, he said earlier. Now he is explaining. Distinction without difference. Very interesting phrase. Both are there. There is a distinction, but there is also no total difference. In our world, we have only difference. All of us in this, what we are listening to, is all different from each other. We don't know their thoughts, we don't know their bodies, we don't know even their body functioning, we don't know. But this is in the supramental, you are aware of everything, and yet you are, there's a difference, working difference. Okay? But in the absolute unity, which I spoken of earlier, that he does not live in the body-mind life. Okay? That's a difference. But in the supermind, which is a decisive step, okay, it's a middle term, there you are aware of both. It realizes its identity with all existences, but it keeps a distinction without difference, by which it can have also the contact with them in a certain diverseless. Okay? I like to describe this distinction without difference in a very interesting way. Okay? When you are in absolute unity with everybody else, it's like a whole picture. You have a picture, complete picture. But now you want to make a jigsaw puzzle out of that picture. So what you do is you mark out wherever you want to cut. So there is a unity, the whole picture is available, but you have marked out the places where you want to cut. Okay? So there is distinction without difference. But now if you cut that, okay, and separate it by 2 millimeters, each one, wherever the lines are there, you separate the whole pieces of the jigsaw puzzle by 2 millimeters. So if you stand back, you will still see the whole picture. But each piece has become separate, right? Now, instead of 2 millimeters, so that is the distinction without difference. You are seeing the oneness, you are seeing the whole picture, but you are also seeing the parts. Then you separate those by not by 2 millimeters, but by 1 centimeter. The picture has become bigger because you have expanded the thing. So now, this still, if you are careful enough and you go sufficiently back, you will see the whole picture, but you will see the differences very clearly. Move that now to 1 meter. Each piece is moved 1 meter away from each other. The picture is lost, and you are seeing only the individual pieces. So this is our condition. Okay, total multiplicity. But in the supermind, you are seeing the whole picture and you are also seeing the parts to be cut separately. Okay, so that's the way of understanding this. Distinction without difference. Okay, by which we can have also the contact with them in a certain diverseness. So what do you mean by that? He said, because my thoughts are not your thoughts, but I have identified myself with you. So I experience your thoughts. That's what he's saying. With certain diverseness. Your thoughts are yours and my thoughts are mine. There is a diverseness. But in the absolute cosmic consciousness, your thoughts are also my thoughts, because there is totally oneness. So this is the distinction that is making. Remember the gradations from the highest level to the lowest level. There are gradations. The unity is there at the highest level. As you keep coming down, unity is also there, and also multiplicity, and at the rock bottom, only multiplicity. Okay? So this is that distinction for the joy of contact, which in the mind becomes not only difference, but in its self-experience, division from our other selves. So this is exactly what we have discussed just now. As you keep coming down further and further, then there is separation, complete separation occurs. But in the supermind, why is there a difference? Because to experience joy of others also. I have got my own joy, fine. But somebody else may be enjoying something else in a different way. So why not enjoy that difference also? So that's what they're saying. Okay. Then, this is the distinction for the joy of contact, which in the mind becomes not only difference, but in its self-experience, division from other selves. In its spiritual being, a sense of loss of self, one with us in others, and a reaching after the felicity it has forfeited. So at the lower level, you are looking for the felicity, which you have lost. In life, a compromise between egoistic self-absorption and a blind seeking out for the lost oneness. That's our condition. In its infinite consciousness, the Gnostic soul creates a sort of voluntary limitation for its own wisdom purposes. Wisdom cannot be there if there is only oneness. So at the highest level, there is no question of oneness, because you are the only one. There is no difference. Wisdom is possible when there are different things to be understood, isn't it? Otherwise, you don't speak of wisdom at all. There is no wisdom at the highest level. There is only one. What are you to understand? Only yourself. So he's saying, in the infinite consciousness, the Gnostic soul creates a sort of voluntary limitation. Okay? You make a difference where there is no difference for the enjoyment of the variety. That's what he's saying. Enjoy variety, enjoyment in various types of enjoyment. Limitation for its own wisdom purposes. It has even its particular luminous aura of being in which it moves, although beyond that it enters into all things and identifies itself with all being and all existences. Now, what he's saying is very interesting. Let's have a look. He's saying it is even a particular luminous aura of being. There is a certain luminous body in which it moves in itself, but it enters with that body into other bodies, other minds, other vitals. Although beyond that, it enters into all things and identifies itself with all being and all existences. Now he comes to the Ananda aspect. In the Ananda, all is reversed. It's not the same anymore. The center disappears. There is no more center. In the bliss nature, there is no center. Remember he said about a center, individual center. So that center disappears. When you are not in the body-mind life. Even part of you is not there in the body-mind life. Okay? You can be in the body-mind life without ignorance, without multiplicity. It's possible. But in the Ananda plane, that's why they say the Ananda is the highest plane. In the bliss nature, that is Ananda, there is no center, nor any voluntary or imposed circumference. There is a total oneness. But all are one, equal being, one identical spirit. The bliss soul finds and feels itself everywhere. He is not talking of the supramental now, he is talking of the Ananda plane. Okay? The bliss soul finds and feels itself everywhere. It has no mansion. It is Aniketa. Niketa, is the house, and it is no center at all. There is no question of body-mind life. Even the luminous aura that is spoke of, even that is not there. And all has the all for its mansion. The whole universe becomes its palace. Or if it likes, it has all things for its many. It has all things for its many mansions open to each other forever. So all these are possibilities. All other selves are entirely its own selves in action as well as in essence. So even in the physical world, if you are there in that consciousness, all the others also in action in the physical world as well as in essence in the higher world. The joy of contact in diverse oneness, again he uses the word diverse oneness, becomes altogether the joy of absolute unity, identity in innumerable oneness. So, if you remember the image of the picture with the cuts, then you will understand this. Innumerable oneness becomes altogether the joy of absolute unity in innumerable oneness. Existence is no longer formulated in terms of knowledge. Why? Because the known and knowledge and the knower are wholly one here. And since all possesses all in an intimate identity beyond the closest closeness, there is no need of what we call knowledge. Because what is knowledge? There is a knower and there is something to be known, and the two are connected by knowledge. But in the highest, there is no other, there is nothing to be known, so there is no knowledge. Knower, known, and knowledge become one at the highest level. Okay? All the consciousness is of the bliss of the infinite. All power is power of the bliss of the infinite. All forms and activities are forms and activities of the bliss of the infinite. So everything is seen in terms of Ananda. Okay, forms, activities, okay, actions, everything is seen in terms of Ananda, even power. In this absolute truth of its being, the eternal soul of Ananda lives, here deformed by contrary phenomena, there brought back and transfigured into their reality. So if you are a soul who is living in the Ananda plane, you are absolutely one with everybody and only Ananda. But that same soul, when it comes down into the physical world, it becomes deformed by contrary phenomena, all the opposites. The one becomes the many, the formless becomes form, and the power, infinite power, becomes incapacity and a certain limited power. They are brought back and transferred into their reality. So, this is the description of the supramental and the Ananda plane. So, we have time, we have got about 10 minutes, 11 minutes. So, we'll read the next one. The soul lives, is not abolished. So, Archana Di read, So now, and yesterday I think Shilpa read, so someone else can read. Either Kiran, can you read? Do you have the text with you?
Yeah, yes, yes, I have.
Okay, then will you read the next para? The soul lives.
Yes,
Go
yes,
ahead.
yes. The soul lives, it is not abolished. It is not lost in a featureless indefinite. For on every plane of our existence, the same principle holds. The soul may fall asleep in a trance of self absorption, dwell in an ineffable intensity of God possession, live in the highest glory of its own plane, the Anandaloka, Brahmaloka, Vaikuntha, Goloka of various Indian systems, even turn upon the lower worlds to fill them with its own light and power and beatitude. In the eternal worlds, and more in all worlds above, mind these states exist in each other, for they are not separate, they are coexistent, even coincident powers of the consciousness of the Absolute. The divine on the Ananda plane is not incapable of a world play, or self-regard from any expression of its glories. On the contrary, as the Upanishad insists, the Ananda is the true creative principle, for all takes birth from this divine bliss. All is pre-existent in it as an absolute truth of existence, with the Vijnana brings out and subjects to the voluntary limitation by the idea and the law of the idea. In the Ananda, all law ceases, and there is an absolute freedom without binding term or limit. It is superior to all principles, and in one and the same motion, the enjoyer of all principles, it is free from all gunas, and the enjoyer of its own infinite gunas. It is above all forms, and the builders and enjoyers of all its self forms and figures. This unimaginable completeness is what the spirit is. The spirit transcendent and universal. And to be one in bliss with the transcendent and universal spirit is for the soul to be that and nothing less. Necessarily, since there is on this plane the absolute and the play of absolutes, it is ineffable by any of the conceptions of our mind or by signs of the phenomenal or ideal realities of which mind conceptions are the figures in our intelligence. These realities are themselves indeed only relative symbols of those ineffable absolutes. The symbol, the expressive reality, may give an idea, a perception, sense, vision, contact even of the thing itself to us. But at last we get beyond it to the thing it symbolizes. Transcend idea, vision, contact, pierce through the ideal and pass to the real realities, the identical, the supreme, the timeless and eternal, the infinitely infinite.
So he is describing for the soul when it reaches even the highest level, it need not disappear like the ascetic is saying. The ascetic is saying, I don't want to have anything to do with again the physical world on the birth. I don't want to come down here at all. I want to disappear from where I came from the infinite. I go back to the infinite. But Srinivas's conclusion is quite different. He says that once the soul has been created, it can annihilate its own existence by going into the infinite. Like the Buddhists also want to do that. But that is not necessary. The soul, after realization of these highest planes, can exist. And it can exist in the spiritual planes of consciousness forever. And it can also take birth again. So that's why Srinivas is stressing that the soul lives. It does not disappear. Okay? It need not disappear. It is not abolished, like many philosophies do want. Okay? The Advaitins And the Buddhists, they want absolutely, the Jnana Yogins, they don't want anything to do with the physical world anymore. My individual existence is going back into the infinite from where it came. It's like the wave that comes into being. You see the wave, and finally it dives down and becomes again the ocean. So this is what Simri is saying. The wave need not die down at all. It can continue to exist. The soul can live. Okay? It is not abolished. It is not lost in a featureless indefinite. To appreciate those sentences, sometimes it is a very, very, very ordinary sentence, but it is what the importance will come out if you think of the opposite in the cases. Otherwise, just look at this one sentence, the soul lives. We don't understand the implications. But if you think of the opposite, immediately the significance becomes obvious. So very often, if you want to understand those so-called bland statements, you must think of the opposite. Then it becomes clear. Okay? The soul lives. Others are saying, no, it need not live. But he is saying it can live. It is not abolished. It is not lost in a featureless indefinite. For on every plane of our existence, the same principle holds. Okay? Now he is giving you all those conditions. What can the soul do? The soul may fall asleep in a trance of self-absorption. That's one possibility. Or it can dwell in an ineffable intensity of God possession. It can live in the highest glory of its own plane, whichever plane it has reached. It may be the Anandaloka, it may be the Brahmaloka, it may be Vaikuntha, it may be Goloka, or various Indian systems. I will interrupt here a little bit because the other day I had a video which was sent to me, and it's about a lady in Uttar Pradesh, an elderly lady, and she died and she goes into the heavens, okay, into the higher planes of consciousness. And there she does not want to die because she has got strong attachment with her son, okay. So she is going there and it is very real where she is going. And she goes here and she goes there, and whoever she is meeting, she is saying, I want to go back. And they keep telling her, no, you can't go back, you are dead. And then she sees one door and they say, what is that door? I say, oh, that leads to Anandaloka. Then she says, another door. I don't want this door. Which is the door which will take me back to the physical world? They say, no, you can't go. Then another door is there. It's the Brahmaloka. That is the Brahmaloka. Then she says, okay, like that one by one, she comes to another gate. Vaikuntha is another gate. You can live there permanently in those places. Goloka, she comes finally and she points to a door and says, what is that door? Will it take me to the physical world? Then they say, no. Then where will it take me? It will take you to Goloka. Then she said, okay. She enters there and she says, what is this Goloka? There is no go. There is no cow anywhere. Why is it called Goloka? Because Goloka means light. Huh? So finally that lady, she manages, because she is so keen on coming back. Finally she meets Sri Krishna, because Sri Krishna is a deity. And he says, you want to go back to the earth? Okay, take that door. And then she comes down into her and she remembers her experience. I'm telling you this because of the Anandaloka, Brahmaloka, Vaikuntha and Goloka. They are all systems and planes of consciousness in which you can decide to live there forever. It's like living in Pondicherry in different houses. Okay, exactly in the same way. All these things seem so funny and so almost absurd, but it's a fact. Okay. The other day, I got a book written by a Parsi, okay, a Parsi mother, and her two sons had died in a car accident. They were to the family, and then, now these two sons are there in the higher worlds, and they are living there, and they are going on connecting their mother and giving her instructions about what's going on in the plane of consciousness. So you can live there forever. Okay? So that's what Swami is pointing out. You can take also birth, and Swami wants you to take birth and participate in God's work in the physical world. Okay, so that's the Anandaloka, Brahmaloka, Vaikuntha, Goloka, Vedic systems. Even turn upon the lower worlds to fill them with its own light and power and beatitude. So even these souls who live there in the subtle worlds, they can even have an effect in the physical world. That's what Zen is saying. Even turn upon the lower worlds to fill them with its own light and power and weight. That's what Mother and Son are doing. But they have what? Bodies. Zen is speaking here about beings who don't have bodies. The souls who have lost their body, but they are there in the higher planes, they can still influence the physical world. In the eternal worlds, eternal, they are static, they are not changing. Okay? The eternal worlds are all the different worlds in the spiritual fields and above. In the eternal worlds, and more in all worlds above mind, these states exist in each other. Okay? They are all not separate, they are all merging one into the other, like the rainbow colors. For they are not separate, they are coexistent, even coincident powers of the consciousness of the Absolute. Now that seems a little contradictory, but that's exactly the thing. Anandaloka, Brahmaloka, Vaikuntha, Goloka, okay? Sat, Chit, Shakti, Ananda are all, they can be experienced in different ways, but they are all together, always. But the individual soul, the Jivatman, can experience each aspect separately. And he has described in the above paragraph, he has described the soul that has entered the bliss soul, Anandaloka. Okay? So now he is telling you that these are not separate. They are coexistent and even coexistent powers of the consciousness of the Absolute. The divine on the Ananda plane is not incapable of a world play or self-debarred from any expression of its glories. It's not something separate and only Ananda is there. No, it is capable of everything. On the contrary, as the Upanishad insists, the Ananda is a true creative principle. For all takes birth from this divine bliss. Okay, so he is referring here to the Taittiriya Upanishad, which says that by Ananda, all live. Without Ananda, they cannot live. They come from Ananda and go back into Ananda. That's the Taittiriya Upanishad. And the Ananda is it. For all takes birth from this divine bliss. Now there is a footnote there. Therefore, the world of the Ananda is called the Janaloka in the double sense of birth and delight. So Janaloka, the word Jan is to give birth. Okay, Janma, we know. So the root in Sanskrit is Jan. Jan is to give birth, to come into existence. So Anandaloka is also called Janaloka, because that's what the Taittiriya Upanishad is saying, that everything comes from bliss, lives by bliss and goes back into bliss. All is pre-existent in it as an absolute truth of existence, in which the Vijnana, by the way, it is not to be pronounced as Vijnana, it is not G, it is J. There was a Vedalankar in the ashram, okay? And he had taught us that you have to pronounce it as Vijnana. In which the Vijnana, that's the supermind, brings out and subjects to voluntary limitation by the idea, the law and the idea. By the way, there's a little more, there are about 10-15 lines more, but we have crossed our time now. So we'll stop here and I will make a note. Sunki has to make a note. Page 507, we will start from, it is superior to all principles. Okay? Because we can't finish. There are about 10-15 lines. So we'll finish that and there. But most of the paragraph we have covered. Okay, Sunki? Yeah, in the middle of the paragraph. It is superior to all principles.
Yeah.
We'll take it up.
Yes, I will make a note.
Okay. So much of what we did. Okay, au revoir everybody. Jasmine,
Thank you, Ranga.
Archana Di, Shilpa Di, au revoir everybody.
Thank you.